Just so you know, 70 Christians were beheaded in Congo today. This news, nobody says anything. The media doesn't say anything. The world.
70 Christians have been found beheaded. Yes, beheaded in a church in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why is no one reporting this? Why does no one seem to care? Well, let me bring in Dexter Van Zyl, an expert on anti-Christian violence. Dexter, what can you tell us about this absolutely barbaric atrocity?
Okay, well, first of all, it took place in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a huge country with about 105 million people, that right now is basically in a conflict with neighboring Rwanda over territory in Kivu. Okay? And the violence was perpetrated by an organization that was that is affiliated with ISIS. And the thing is that there are some people who have argued that they are essentially working on behalf of Rwanda because Rwanda is a neighboring country that covets and is actually taking control of an awful lot of the mineral resources in Kivu. And so, what this violence has done is demonstrated that the Congo cannot protect its citizens from violence in Kivu or in North Kivu. And so, what people are worried about is that this is essentially an attempt to kind of destabilize the Democratic Republic of Congo and legitimize Rwandan claims to the minerals in the region. And I don't want to underestimate or downplay the ideological hatred by the perpetrators of this group who murdered these Christians. But the thing is that it's taking place against a backdrop of geopolitics in Africa. And what has happened is, and so if the Congo, under the leadership of Felix Tshisekedi, can't protect its borders, essentially it's going to have to go for help outside the country, and the people live there, and that's why people are worried about it. The Congolese that I've spoken to here in the States say, I said, wait a minute, are you telling me that the Rwandans are supporting this attack? And they said, yes. And I said, but Rwanda is a Christian nation. And they said, yes, but this will help destabilize the region where all of these minerals that are used for the iPhones that we make, that we use in our lives. And so clearly there's an ideological and a theological component going on, but there's also a strategic issue as well.
Oh,
it's terrible, isn't it? It's hard. As a former Peace Corps volunteer, I served in the Congo for about a year, 14 months in the 1980s. And the problem is that if this violence is allowed to continue and the average Congolese learns and recognizes, and the violence like this against Christians perpetrated by jihadists is not a new problem. It's been a problem in North Africa for a long time. And the problem is that trying to get people to pay attention to it is very difficult.
Well, that's my second question is you see the headline, 70 Christians beheaded, and you think, this what? You almost can't fathom that headline. But is Islamic violence against Christians in Africa, is this an anomaly, basically?
Oh, no, absolutely not. This takes place in a number of countries throughout the region. And there are some people who are worried that essentially what we're looking at is a jihad against Christians in numerous other places in North Africa. And routinely we hear reports of these acts of violence. And the problem is that what happens when the Christians start to fight back? Are we going to start to see the equivalent of an interreligious war in the continent? And the problem is that there's going to be huge problems with this. The problem is that, first of all, the reason why this doesn't get as much traction as, say, the conflict, the Palestinian suffering in Gaza is because there's just not that many reporters on the ground. And the Congo is a huge, dangerous place to be a reporter. And frankly, also, there's just a fair amount of ideological indifference to anti-Christian violence on the part of reporters in the West.
And Dexter, I think that's the question. If you were to replace 70 Congolese Christian with any other minority group, 70 Palestinians were beheaded, 70 people at a pride parade were beheaded, this would be the biggest news story of the decade. And yet this just happened and no one's reporting on it. And literally crickets.
Right. And it's like that with Boko Haram when they murder people in Nigeria. There's basically crickets. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have essentially kind of an anti-Christian bias on the part of people who run the media. And the thing is that I think there's another factor is that essentially Christianity has been lumped in with essentially this whole notion of settler colonialism. And that whatever violence is directed their way is largely a consequence of the violence perpetrated by Christians in years past. But I'm going to tell you, I lived in Zaire. I lived in the DRC when it was called Zaire, and one of the reasons why I became a much more devout Christian was because of the church that I went to every Sunday morning as a volunteer. Okay. And I would go and talk to the local pastor when I had like spiritual crises as a volunteer. And the thing is that, so what has happened is that Black African Christians, okay, have suffered the consequences of hostility towards Western civilization and Christianity itself, in part because people don't care what happens to Christians, unless it can be blamed. And part of it has to do with the fact that if the perpetrators are dark-skinned, well, then we're going to have to give them a pass. And it's a very, very strange milieu, so to speak, that we work in. But the thing is that unfortunately, this is the cynical side of me. I've been somebody that has documented hostility towards Israel for the past 20 years. But if the IDF were responsible for these beheadings, it would have made the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times and every newspaper throughout the world. And there would be, Israeli Jews condemning it as well. But the problem is that because it's essentially black on black violence, nobody cares. And there was a book called Stealth Conflicts by a scholar by the name of Virgil Hawkins, and he's a tremendous scholar. And he documented the number of newspaper articles about the civil war in the Congo. And this was at a point of time when 5.4 million people have died. There were a few dozen newspaper articles or a few dozen news shows or segments on it. But then when you looked at the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians, which every one of the deaths is tragic, we're talking at this time maybe over a time frame of maybe 30 to 40,000 people had died. There were literally thousands of articles. Mm. So there were more articles than there were people killed during a specific period of time. And it had to do with, first of all, it was in people's interest that this conflict be covered. And more importantly, it was just easier to go to cover. The violence in the Congo is a huge country. It's kind of desolate. If you go there, there's a very good chance you're going to get very sick and you may not get good medical care. That was something that I experienced as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Yeah.
Go to Israel. You can have a nice meal at a restaurant in Jerusalem the evening after you've basically covered a protest at the security barrier.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you're saying. It's selective outrage, and there's this line when people talk in the about Israel in the news, and you hear it a lot, which is this: if there's no Jews, there's no news. Right across the border in Syria, some people have estimates of close to 1 million Syrians died, and I think your point is very insightful and very spot on. Let's all be praying for these incredible African Christians that are standing up to just unimaginable barbarity. Let's be praying for the church in the DRC. Dexter Van Zyl, thank you so much for your insight and obviously your life experience. It's been very, very helpful. Dexter, thank you so much, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
What can law enforcement and security agencies do now that you've listed them that they couldn't do yesterday? What does this actually accomplish when it comes to investigations?
The listing gives law enforcement additional powers to track, trace, find the financing, disrupt it, interrupt it. It also widens the net through which law enforcement can exercise powers, as I've just mentioned in my remarks, to deal with actors who are involved. So this is a very important new tool that the RCMP, for example, and other police of jurisdiction will be able to rely on to be able to track and trace the money. We know that by interrupting the money, we're going to have a profound influence on the activities of the groups.
President Zelensky talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that basically couldn't be won, that never had to start and never would have started if I was president, not even a chance. And it didn't start for 4 years, never would have started. But a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. They'll never settle that war without our involvement. That's why they did such a great job this weekend. That's why Saudi Arabia did such a great job this weekend in hosting. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably maybe he wants to keep the gravy train going. I don't know what's the problem, but he hasn't been able. He's very upset that he wasn't invited. He could have come if he wanted to, but that he wasn't invited to Saudi Arabia. But he's been working for 3 years. There's never been even meetings or phone calls to stop this war. It's a horrible thing. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions of people have unnecessarily died. And you can't bring a war to an end if you don't talk to both sides. You got to talk. They haven't been talking for 3 years. So we hope to see a ceasefire soon and to reestablish stability in Europe and the Middle East. He refuses to have elections. It's low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? It's hard to be high. Somebody said, oh, no, his polls are good. Give me a break.
President Trump has a demand for Ukraine.
I told them that I want the equivalent, like $500 billion worth of rare earth, and they've essentially agreed to do that. So at least we don't feel stupid.
Ukraine hasn't essentially agreed to do that, but it's claimed Donald Trump wants 50% of Ukraine's mineral resources in return for past military aid and future security guarantees. He claims, without evidence, the US has already spent $350 billion. Available data suggests the figure is actually $120 billion. Last year, President Zelensky did say foreign firms may get access to some of Ukraine's natural resources after the war. This month, he said the Americans helped the most and therefore the Americans should earn the most. But he has a limit.
You will write down some guarantees and we will write a memorandum with some percentages. I was told only 50%. I said, OK, no.
Susan Glasser of The New Yorker calls the idea a straight-out extortion blackmail demand. To Trump, it's simply what is owed. And The Telegraph reports Ukraine was recently given a draft deal, one that goes far beyond US control over Ukraine's critical minerals and includes everything from ports and infrastructure to oil and gas. The Telegraph says this amounts to a higher share of Ukrainian GDP than reparations imposed on Germany after the First World War. And there are reasons why the US would want Ukraine's resources. China recently banned the exports of several minerals and metals to the US. Ukraine could be an alternative source. One assessment says it has great potential to become the mineral superpower in Europe. That includes graphite, used in batteries and nuclear reactors, and lithium, also used in batteries. Both are considered critical to the US economy and national security. Ukraine also has rare earth elements used in electronics and clean energy. But accessing these resources is not straightforward. Some are in territory controlled by Russia, others are close to the front line, and across Ukraine, there are challenges.
Mining is an ecosystem. Mining is energy grids, it's water infrastructure, it's roads, it's ports, it's rail, and a lot of that is gone.
Despite this, Donald Trump appears to be giving Ukraine a choice: give up many of its minerals or risk being left to fight Russia without US help.
A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction.
Ele está tentando virar imperador do mundo, ou seja, está tentando dar palpite em todos os países, em todas as políticas públicas contra imigrantes, ou seja, os imigrantes que estão nos Estados Unidos foram para lá muitas vezes para trabalhar em profissões que os americanos já não queriam mais trabalhar.
President Zelensky was legitimately elected in free, fair and democratic elections. Ukraine is a democracy. Putin's Russia is not. When it comes to information that the American authorities use, of course, there is nothing I cannot share any light on that. This is something that you would have to ask them. There can be no solution for Ukraine without the involvement of Ukraine, nor without the involvement of the European Union. Ukraine's security is the European Union's security. So I think our line here is remains steadfast, as I would say.
So the blue one is just as important as we are.
Мы, безусловно, самым внимательным образом отслеживаем все эти сообщения, отслеживаем все иногда противоречивые официальные заявления европейцев на этот счет. Это вызывает нашу обеспокоенность, потому что речь идет о направлении воинских контингентов, о возможном, эвентуальном направлении воинских контингентов стран НАТО, Североатлантического альянса на Украину. Это приобретает совсем иное значение с точки зрения нашей безопасности. Поэтому эта тема важная для нас, мы очень внимательно отслеживаем это. Хочу вам напомнить слова нашего министра иностранных дел, что, конечно же, размещение воинских контингентов стран, которые являются членами НАТО на территории Украины, не может для нас быть принято.
Very impressive. So is there any social up here?
Whilst all the focus may be on talks, not even negotiations, our concern as defence ministers is that we're not jeopardising the peace by forgetting about the war. And our job as defence ministers is to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position going into any talks. And that means continuing to step up the military aid that we in Europe, alongside we argue to the States, needs to be maintained.
אחיי ואחיותיי, אזרחי ישראל היקרים, ביום הזה כולנו מאוחדים. כולנו מאוחדים ביגון כבד מנשוא. כל בית בישראל מרכין היום את ראשו. אנחנו מרכינים את ראשנו על האובדן הכבד של 4 חטופינו. כולנו כואבים בכאב שהוא מהול בזעם. כולנו זועמים על מפלצות החמאס. 4 ארונות יקירנו מחייבים אותנו יותר מתמיד להבטיח להישבע שמה שקרה ב7 באוקטובר לא יקרה שוב לעולם. קודמיהם של יקירנו זועק אלינו מן האדמה. הוא מחייב אותנו לבוא חשבון עם המרצחים השפלים. ונבוא איתם חשבון. אל נקמות אדוני, אל נקמות הופיע. הלב שלנו סדוק, אבל הרוח שלנו לא נשברת. ועם הרוח הזאת נחזיר את כל חטופינו, נשמיד את הרוצחים, נחסל את החמאס, ויחד, בעזרת השם, נבטיח את אחיי ואחיותיי, אזרחי ישראל היקרים. ביום הזה כולנו מאוחדים. כולנו מאוחדים ביגון כבד מנשוא. כל בית בישראל מרכין היום את ראשו. אנחנו מרכינים את ראשנו על האובדן הכבד של 4 חטופינו. כולנו כואבים בכאב שהוא מהול בזעם. כולנו זועמים על מפלצות החמאס. 4 ארונות יקירנו מחייבים אותנו יותר מתמיד להבטיח להישבע שמה שקרה ב7 באוקטובר לא יקרה שוב לעולם. קודמיהם של יקירנו זועק אלינו מן האדמה. הוא מחייב אותנו לבוא חשבון עם המרצחים השפלים. ונבוא איתם חשבון. הלב שלנו סדוק, אבל הרוח שלנו לא נשברת. ועם הרוח הזאת נחזיר את כל חטופינו, נשמיד את הרוצחים, נחסל את החמאס, ויחד, בעזרת השם, נבטיח את עתידנו.
Breaking news out of Israel where blasts have rocked Tel Aviv. Our Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is there. Matthew, what can you tell us?
Catherine, good morning. We've had reports over the last hour or so that there have been 3 explosions on buses in southern Tel Aviv. We do need to stress that these buses were empty at the time. They were in a parking lot in the southern Tel Aviv suburb of Bat Yam. That's where they had ended their day there, but they have exploded with explosive devices on board there. Israel police are currently investigating the matter and are saying they are looking into whether or not this is a suspected terror attack. There are some reports in the Israeli media here that another 2 explosive devices have been found on other buses. Again, they have not exploded, and we are hearing from Israeli authorities that no one has been injured in these blasts. This news is just coming through to us, and you can understand, based on just how serious it sounds, that there are many differing accounts as to what has actually happened there. We are trying to sift through those reports as we speak to you at the moment. But yes, that news that 3 empty buses here in Tel Aviv have exploded in the southern Tel Aviv suburb of Bat Yam. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office say he is getting urgent briefings on this matter and will be convening a meeting of security officials within the hour.